Sure, I'm Dr. Wansaget Luwea, an obstetrician gynecologist based at the Women and Newborn Hospital. Most of you know it as maternity. And I'm also a lecturer at the University of Zambia School of Medicine, meaning I train doctors to be good doctors.
Right. I also noticed that the president of the US, or former president Barack Obama, said something about you a few weeks ago. What was that about?
Oh yeah, I was so thrilled to have had that a tweet on Obama's feed, which was pinned from his iPhone. Yeah, he was celebrating moms around the world. So I was one of the moms that the Obama Foundation was celebrating, just how I've managed to have kids and then my career going. Thank you.
Interesting. And talking about moms, and talking about women, I know you're quite passionate about issues relating to gender-based violence. Are we seeing an improvement?
We are really seeing more cases being reported. One of the issues would be that we've been conducting sensitizations to just encourage women to report. You know, this is something that is very private. Mm-hmm. So most people fail to come out in the open and say that they are suffering gender-based violence.
Right. So now, from your perspective, what is gender-based violence?
Okay. I'll start by defining what gender is, because sometimes, many times, it's actually confused with sex. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the WHO has a very clear definition, which is like socially constructed characteristics of men and women. So these may differ society, by culture, between men and women. Mm-hmm. And then sex is now this biological attribute. So when you talk about gender-based violence, it means violating someone by virtue of their gender. A man can violate a woman, and a woman can violate a man. Mm-hmm. This is a common thing. But in society, I think whenever you mention the term gender, it has like a female face. Yes. Everyone will think of a woman, but it encompasses everyone. Mm-hmm.
So what has been your involvement in this issue of gender-based violence?
Oh yeah, so I serve as a physician at the one-stop center at the Women and Newborn Hospital. It is actually in our CO3, mainly. I'm sure people know our emergency gynae. When I say CO3, those that have visited UTH would know, but it's officially the emergency gynecological ward. We have a one-stop center where there's the concept of one-stop center means that there's a police officer, there's a nurse, and then a psychosocial counselor, as well as a doctor in one point, so that when a client comes in who's been violated, sexually mainly, would attend to them in one sitting than for them to go around with papers to get the help that they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so now, what forms does gender-based violence take?
Yeah, so it's kind of diverse actually. Mm-hmm. Usually, like I said, when you talk about gender, people think of a female, and when you talk about gender-based violence, again, many people will think of the sexual assault aspect. Mm-hmm. But there are many ways that people are being violated every single day, and it's not picked as such. Okay. So some of the forms would be physical violence. Okay, this could be targeted towards a spouse or towards a child battering or torturing, and some people have ended up being killed, okay, as a consequence. There's also what is known as emotional violence, which is uttering mean words towards something, you know, something that is demeaning, and I'm sure most of you know the silent treatment. That is a form of emotional violence, okay. Then you would have economic violence, where you deprive one who depends on you their financial needs. Is it transport? Is it their basic needs? Is it food? That's also a form of violence. And of course, the big one is sexual violence. Mm-hmm. Okay? And for this one, the main things that are known is the rape and the defilement. But there's also a lot of sexual harassments and going on in different workplaces, indecent assault, and inappropriate touching of women in working places is also a form of gender-based violence.
Mm-hmm. So among the many types of gender-based violence that you have, the many forms that you described, which ones do you see the most in your practice?
The most reported is the sexual gender-based violence. Mm-hmm. That's the one that we see. And occasionally we get to see the physical violence, especially when it has resulted into injuries that need emergency medical care.
Okay. So in your practice, what processes do you go through to determine that yes, this someone has undergone, say for example, sexual violence?
Okay, so I'll give a small brief on why they are coming, what is causing it. Then
Yes.
I go down to just say what we see when they come here.
Right, that's
Yeah.
fine.
So just an overview. We have seen that at least it is a worldwide, actually statistically written that there are about 1 in 6 women and 1 in 3 men would have experienced violence in their lifetime. Those are high statistics. And our own Zambia Demographic Health Survey for 2014, sorry if it's a bit complicated, but about 43% 15 to women aged 15 to 49 have experienced this violence. Okay, and one interesting thing is that these women are being violated by people that they know. Some of them, as deep as their intimate partners, end up violating them. So it's quite on the rise. And we find that things like the patriarchal system, where you have men being in a position of power, take that for granted and violate women. And also it's interesting for you to know that the drive to violate someone sexually is not about a craving for sex, but it's to show the power, the aggressiveness. So that should be very clear. I know there's been a lot about how a woman dresses and how that they'll be violated sexually, but it's not really about that craving. It's about that position of power. Of course, people who've grown up in homes where there is sexual violence are also more likely to perpetuate it into other generations. Okay, and then the consequences, of course, are grave. You find that people end up contracting STIs, and psychological trauma is even worse off. Like I said, in the one-stop center at the UTH, a gynae emergency, we have a psychosocial counselor there who takes care of these women, and they go through a process to just calm them down. Others end up with unwanted pregnancies, others end up with just physical injury. We've ended up taking women into theater because of injuries, and sometimes children have ended up in theater to just repair those injuries.
So, like you've outlined, there are a number of risks that come with particularly sexual violence. Some of them it's pregnancy, some of them it's contraction of disease. How do you deal with either children or women who end up getting pregnant from a relative because of this vice?
So we have different families handle these issues differently. Yeah, some of them opt to terminate the pregnancy. It becomes very traumatic to them that they can't handle it. So refer them to appropriate services where they will, to appropriate teams where they'll be able to access this service. Others have opted to keep the pregnancies, and then we also link them to support where they could get clothing and food for the baby, because this is a baby that was not planned for, and maybe the circumstances won't allow them to manage this baby adequately. So we create linkages as a one-stop center.
How do you manage the risk of exposure to disease?
So what actually happens is when we receive a client, we have what we call acute cases and older cases. So we usually emphasize to people when we are giving awareness like now that people report immediately that they've been violated, that is for the sexual assault, that they should report to any one of the one-stop centers. The country has about slightly less than 30 one-stop centers, but any health facility will be able to handle you. What happens is when you come within 72 hours, that's the acute period, we are very aggressive in your management. That's why we're having the one-stop centers, because we have an option time in the 72 hours after that sexual assault to collect forensic evidence. We collect whatever is on the body, and we also we do what we call a vaginal examination. We check if there are any cuts, any injuries, and we also collect samples, sperm samples, which we send to the lab for a confirmation. The other things that we do to prevent these diseases, we give what we call HIV post-exposure prophylaxis to help prevent HIV. We give antibiotics to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. And most importantly, we give what we call the emergency contraceptive pill for a woman who's not on contraception. So this helps these women. However, if they come after 72 hours, it becomes a challenge, because then these things will no longer be useful. But I should emphasize that for the emergency contraception, we have what we call the loop most women would know that, which can go up to 5 days as a method of contraception. And also emphasis is that they shouldn't have bath, because the moment someone takes a bath or they change their clothing, then we lose a lot of evidence. Yeah, and I think the followers may be happy to know that we also actually, as doctors, go to court as expert witnesses. We go and justify what we found and give evidence to the court. Yeah, so we'll stand in for you. If you come on time and we have that evidence, it makes our work far much easier to even defend you as expert witnesses in court.
So what you're saying is that if someone has been sexually abused, particularly women, they shouldn't take a bath, they shouldn't change their clothing, they should just come straight to the one-stop center.
Yes, absolutely.
That would make their case even stronger in
Yes.
terms of your capacity to collect evidence.
Yes.
Okay, I see. All right. So then how do you manage these people going forward? I mean, there's the issue of psychological trauma.
So we have a strong system of psychosocial counselors who are present at the one-stop center. This one-stop center is actually supported by the CDC. Yeah, so they have a schedule of psychological assessments. If it's a minor, they'll be supported by their guardian. Okay, so they will come for a period of a minimum of 6 weeks. At that point, if we make an assessment and think they need a psychologist to take it over, because what we have is a psychosocial counselor. From that point, we escalate it and link them to the psychologist and the psychiatrists until they are discharged. And many of our clients who've gone through this process, they've done very well. We've had, especially the adolescents, we've had them come through, they can't even narrate their ordeal, they are just tearing, the self-care is compromised, they can't eat. But after about 6 weeks, you find that they do far much better and they start interacting with the community. Sometimes you find that the counseling session may involve even their guardian. You find that the guardian also have had their challenges about sometimes it's an odd thing that would have happened to them, they didn't go through this counseling. So we managed to pick them and then we'll do like a double counseling for the family members so that we have a smoother journey. And we have good stories about that.
Okay. Is there a link between socioeconomic status and propensity to commit sexual violence?
Yes, so socioeconomic factors are actually quite high on the list of being violated, and actually on both sides.
Okay.
Those who are perpetuating the violence and those who are victims, to say, the survivors, because many times they depend on these people. Remember I said these are people that they know who violate them sexually. Sometimes there are people that they live within their homes. Okay, and we've also seen a trend of these tag-alongs that we do to help you babysit your children, these small girls who move in homes, who take care of the children. They are actually suffering a lot of sexual assault. And then they know that this man is violating the child. They would even report probably to their aunties or their whoever is keeping them. But they will hush them to say, if this man goes to court, what are you going to eat? Who will send you to school? So that is a big driver for this violence. And that's why a lot of people don't report, because the breadwinner is the one who's usually perpetuating this kind of acts.
Yeah. That's very interesting. In terms of the size of the problem, talk about statistics. How big is this problem either in our country or here at UTH or in Lusaka?
So at our one-stop center, we see like 2 women per day. Yeah, so it's big. Yeah, on average, we would see between 40 and 60 women in a month. And the numbers have shown an upward trend. But I'll refer back to the Social Demographic Health Survey, which gave us about 43% of women between the ages of 15 to 49 would have experienced sexual gender-based violence.
Are there statistics on where these people come from, like by location, in terms of Lusaka? Is there specific locations where you see a lot of sexual violence?
We have a number of places that we follow. Sometimes we get peaks in where they are coming from. But the area around Garden House is one of the commoner places. Okay. Yeah, and at certain times we would have the same region, the same locality where women would be coming from. And they will be the same age group, these who work as shop sellers, we had a peak a couple of months ago in Chilanga where we even alerted the police officers to say we are getting a number of women being raped by unknown people, most of them knocking off from work. They'll steal their phones, their money, and then they leave them unconscious. But and then there was a lot of strangulations in the Chilanga area like 2 months ago, which we had alerted the people in the network that they look out for. And they usually have a quick response. They'll go into an area and try to find out why such things are happening.
Okay. Now, Dr. Rubea, for as somebody who works in this particular area and as an expert in the field, what would be your take-home message to people who are listening to us and watching this video right now?
Right. Take-home message, one, as families, we need to educate our children about the different forms of gender-based violence and then sexual gender-based violence, because there's a tendency not to report. People should not be embarrassed to report. And if that happens to you, please remember not to take a shower, report the nearest health facility so that the forensic examination could be taken. And also know that there is support for people, psychological support, and then the people who are perpetuating violence also should be answerable. We have a big tendency of families withdrawing such cases, but it doesn't help anyone in any way because the psychological pressure on the survivors is too much. So I'll just encourage everyone to say, don't be embarrassed to report such an occurrence, whether you're male or female. It can happen to anyone. So don't feel like if, say your husband beats you, it should be normal, that's a sign of love. Or if your wife shows some kind of violence also towards you, don't take it as a mere happening. Thank you.
All right.